This is the embarrassment we all have to deal with. That's what my daughter's future mother-in-law said when she introduced me to her country club friends at the engagement party. Everyone laughed at my simple dress and comfortable shoes. Then the restaurant manager walked over and said something that made her face go white. "Miss Brennan, we didn't know you were here. Would you like your usual private table? The one on the top floor you use when you visit your properties?" My name is Margaret Brennan, but most people call me Maggie. I'm 64 years old, and I've spent the last 40 years building something most people would never guess by looking at me. I shop at Talbot's, drive a 7-year-old Honda Accord, and live in the same modest townhouse I bought 30 years ago in a middle-class neighborhood. Nothing about me screams wealth. And that's exactly how I prefer it. My daughter Claire had been dating Ryan Hartford for 2 years, and I'd met his mother Victoria exactly 3 times before tonight. Each time, she made it abundantly clear that she found me lacking. During our first meeting, she asked if I'd ever traveled abroad. When I said I preferred staying close to home, she laughed and told her friends I was provincial. The second time, she commented on my simple jewelry and suggested Claire could help me shop for something more appropriate. The third time, she outright asked if I needed financial assistance with wedding expenses, speaking slowly as if I might not understand. The engagement party was at Merlot's, one of the most exclusive restaurants in downtown Portland. Victoria had insisted on hosting it there, making a point of mentioning how her family had been dining there for 3 generations. The place was beautiful, I had to admit, exposed brick walls, crystal chandeliers, and a wine collection that probably cost more than most people's houses. I wore a navy blue dress from Talbot's, pearls that belonged to my mother, and sensible pumps. Nothing flashy. Claire had offered to take me shopping for something fancier, but I told her I was perfectly comfortable as I was. She gave me that worried look she gets when she thinks I'm about to be judged, but she didn't push. Ryan is a good kid. Really, he is. He works as an architect, paid his own way through graduate school, and treats my daughter like she hung the moon. His father, Richard Hartford, runs a mid-sized commercial real estate firm. Nice enough man, though he clearly lets Victoria run the show. They live in the West Hills in a house that's probably mortgaged to the hilt, drive matching Mercedes, and belong to all the right clubs. The party was in full swing when Victoria approached with 3 of her friends. All of them wore designer dresses and carried handbags that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Or at least, more than they thought my grocery budget was. "Margaret," she said with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes, "I want you to meet some dear friends. This is Barbara, Constance, and Judith. We all serve on the Arts Council together." They looked me up and down with barely concealed amusement. I'd seen that look before, many times. "It's lovely to meet you," I said warmly, extending my hand. Victoria put her arm around Claire, pulling my daughter close in a gesture that felt more possessive than affectionate. We're all so thrilled about the engagement. Ryan deserves the very best, and Claire is such a sweet girl. Despite her, well, she paused delicately, more modest background. Claire's face flushed red. "Mom comes from a perfectly nice background," she said quietly. "Oh, of course, dear," Victoria said, patting her arm. "I didn't mean anything by it. We can't all come from country club families. There's nothing wrong with being ordinary." Barbara leaned in, lowering her voice in a way that was clearly meant to be heard. "Is it true your mother was a secretary?" "I worked in property management," I said evenly. "For many years." "How quaint," Constance said. "Was that at one of those little apartment complexes?" Before I could answer, Victoria cut in. "The point is, we're all family now, and family takes care of each other. Richard and I have already told Ryan that we'll help with the wedding expenses. We wouldn't want Claire to feel she has to compromise on her special day because of," she gestured vaguely at me, "circumstances." "That's very generous," I said, keeping my voice neutral, "but I'm perfectly capable of contributing to my daughter's wedding." Judith actually laughed. "Oh, honey, Merlot's catering alone starts at $50,000. I'm sure you can help with the flowers or something." "This is the embarrassment we all have to deal with," Victoria said to her friends, just loud enough for me to hear. "Ryan's marrying into a family with no connections, no culture. I suppose love makes you overlook these things." That's when Thomas Chen, the restaurant manager, spotted me. His face lit up and he hurried over. "Miss Brennan," he said, slightly out of breath. "We didn't know you were here. Would you like your usual private table? The one on the top floor you use when you visit your properties?" The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's smile froze on her face. Her friends exchanged confused glances. Claire looked between Thomas and me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I'm fine here, Thomas, I said gently. I'm with my daughter tonight. But thank you for asking. Of course, he said. If you need anything at all, please let me know. And congratulations on the lease renewals last week. Mr. Patterson said the Hartford Commercial Group was very pleased with the terms. He walked away, leaving a crater where Victoria's superiority had been moments before. What did he mean by your properties? Barbara asked slowly. And what was that about the Hartford Commercial Group? Constance added. Victoria was staring at me with a look of dawning horror. You can't be. You're not the Brennan from Brennan Holdings? I took a sip of my wine and smiled. I prefer to keep my business life separate from my personal life. It helps me understand who people really are. The truth was simple, though I'd spent 40 years making sure most people never knew it. I started buying rental properties when I was 25 years old. A small duplex in southeast Portland that I bought for $42,000 with money I'd saved working 2 jobs. I lived in one unit and rented the other. The rental income covered most of my mortgage. I was methodical. Every dollar I made, I saved. Every property I bought, I kept. I learned everything about real estate law, property management, market cycles, and tenant relations. When the market crashed in 2008, I had saved enough to buy 12 properties at rock-bottom prices. By 2012, those properties had tripled in value. My late husband, Thomas, supported my work completely. He was a high school teacher, and we lived comfortably but simply on his salary. Every cent from my properties went back into buying more. Thomas died 5 years ago, and by then our portfolio included over 200 properties, apartment buildings, commercial spaces, even the land under 3 shopping centers. Claire knew I owned rental properties. She thought I had maybe 10 or 15 units, enough to supplement Social Security. She had no idea that Brennan Holdings controlled over 300 properties worth more than $300 million. That the building we were standing in right now, along with the entire block, belonged to me. That her future father-in-law's company paid me over $200,000 a year in rent for their office space. I'd kept it quiet for the same reason I'd kept everything else quiet. I wanted Claire to build her own life, make her own choices, earn her own success. She worked as a pediatric nurse, saved for her own down payment, paid her own student loans. She was proud of what she'd accomplished, and she should be. I didn't want money to color her relationships or her sense of self. But looking at Victoria's shocked face, I was starting to wonder if my secrecy had been a mistake. Victoria recovered first. She always did. Her social training was too ingrained to let her show weakness for long. I think there's been some confusion, she said with a brittle laugh. Brennan is a common name. I pulled out my phone and opened an email I'd received that morning. I turned the screen toward her. It was from Patterson Property Management, the firm that handled leasing for most of my commercial properties. The subject line read, Hartford Commercial Group lease renewal approved. Unless there's another Brennan who owns the building at 1247 Southwest Morrison Street, I said quietly. I think we both know there's no confusion. Richard Hartford had joined us now, drawn by the commotion. What's going on? He asked. Victoria's face had gone from white to red. Nothing, she snapped. We're just having a conversation. But her friends were already pulling out their phones, clearly Googling Brennan Holdings. I watched as their expressions changed from skepticism to shock to something that looked uncomfortably like calculation. Oh my God, Barbara whispered. Margaret Brennan. One of Portland's most successful property investors. There's an article here from the Business Journal last year about women in real estate. Claire took the phone from Barbara's hand and read the article. When she looked up at me, her eyes were filled with confusion and hurt. Mom? Is this true? Before I could answer, Victoria found her voice again. This doesn't change anything. Family is about more than money. Really? I asked. Because 5 minutes ago you were explaining to your friends what an embarrassment I was, how I came from nothing, how I had no culture or connections. I never said that, she protested. You absolutely did, Judith said, and I had to give her credit for honesty. You said it was embarrassing that Ryan was marrying into a family with no social standing. Victoria's eyes flashed with something ugly. Well, if you have so much money, why do you dress like a librarian? Why do you live in that tiny townhouse? Why do you drive that ancient car? She was getting louder now, drawing attention from other tables. If you're so successful, why do you hide it like you're ashamed? I'm not ashamed, I said calmly. I just don't need to prove anything to anyone. My choices are my own, and I make them for my own reasons. Claire was crying now, quietly. Ryan had his arm around her, looking miserable. I realized that my attempt to protect my daughter had somehow made everything worse. "I think I should go," I said, setting down my wine glass. "Claire, sweetheart, we'll talk tomorrow. I'm sorry this happened tonight." I walked out of Merlot's with as much dignity as I could manage. Behind me, I could hear Victoria's voice rising, Richard trying to calm her down, and Claire's quiet sobs. The cool Portland evening air hit my face, and I stood there for a moment, wondering how 40 years of careful planning had just exploded in a single evening. My phone rang at 7 the next morning. It was Claire. "Mom, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me?" I'd been up most of the night asking myself the same question. "Can I come over? We need to talk." An hour later, I was sitting in Claire's small apartment in Selwood. She'd bought it herself 2 years ago, so proud of making that down payment. Now I wondered if she felt betrayed that I could have bought her a house outright but hadn't. "I wanted you to have your own life," I started. "When your father and I started building the business, we made a decision. We would live simply. We wouldn't change our lifestyle or our values. And most importantly, we wouldn't let money define our family." "But Mom," she said, her voice breaking, "I've been so worried about you. Worried about your retirement, about whether you had enough. I've been putting aside money to help you if you needed it someday." That guilt hit harder than anything Victoria had said. "Oh, sweetheart, and now I find out you're some kind of real estate tycoon? That you could have helped me with school loans, with the house, with everything?" She was crying again. "Why didn't you trust me?" "It wasn't about trust," I said. "It was about wanting you to have what I had. The pride of building something yourself, the confidence that comes from knowing you did it on your own. But that wasn't fair. That was your choice to make, not mine." She wiped her eyes. "And now Victoria is telling everyone that you've been lying for years, that you tricked them, that you probably tricked Dad into marrying you for his teacher's pension." I felt cold anger settle in my chest. "She said that? She's furious. She's telling people that you're a fraud, that you hide your wealth because you know it's not really earned, that property owners are basically slumlords who exploit people." Claire's phone buzzed. She looked at it and her face went pale. "Ryan says his mother is having her lawyer look into your business practices. She's telling people there must be something illegal going on, otherwise why would you hide it?" 2 days later, I was sitting in my lawyer's office. Martin Webb had handled my business affairs for 20 years, and he was the closest thing I had to a friend who knew the full scope of my holdings. "Victoria Hartford is a piece of work," he said, reading through the letter her attorney had sent. "She's threatening to report you to the IRS, to the State Housing Authority, and to file complaints about predatory rental practices." "My properties are all in perfect compliance," I said. "Every building is maintained above code. My rents are at or below market rate. I've never had a serious complaint." "I know that, and you know that." But Martin leaned back in his chair. "Margaret, she doesn't care about facts. She cares about revenge. You humiliated her in front of her friends. More than that, you made her look like a fool. She won't let that go." "What are my options?" "We can fight every complaint. We have documentation for everything. It'll be expensive and time-consuming, but we'll win. The problem is, the more she digs, the more public this becomes. Your privacy is already compromised. This will make it worse." "And the alternative?" Martin pulled out a different file. "I've been looking into the Hartford family finances. They're not as solid as they appear. Their house is mortgaged for nearly 90% of its value. Richard's business has been struggling since the pandemic. They've been maintaining their lifestyle on credit and the assumption that Richard's connections will eventually pay off." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think Victoria is about to make you a proposal. She's going to suggest some kind of family financial arrangement, a trust, an investment opportunity, something that gives her access to your assets while making it look like you're being generous." The call came that afternoon. Victoria's voice was smooth as silk. "Margaret, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I'd like to apologize. Could we meet for coffee? Just the two of us?" She chose a Starbucks in the Pearl District, neutral ground. When I arrived, she was already seated, wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost $3,000. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as I sat down. "I've had time to think about everything, and I realize I may have overreacted." I waited. "The thing is, we're going to be family. Ryan and Claire are getting married, and that means we need to find a way to work together." She took a sip of her latte. "I've been talking to Richard, and we have an idea that could benefit everyone." Here it comes, I thought. You've done remarkably well with your property investments, Victoria continued, but real estate can be volatile. Richard has connections throughout the city, relationships with developers, politicians, planning commissioners. What if we combined our resources, your capital with his expertise? You want me to invest in your husband's company. I want us to create a family partnership, something that would give both of our children security. We could structure it so that when we're gone, Ryan and Claire would inherit a thriving business instead of a complicated portfolio of rental properties. She made it sound so reasonable, so logical. And what would this partnership look like exactly? We'd need to do proper due diligence, of course. Richard's lawyer would need to review all your holdings, your financial statements, your tax returns. Then we'd create a new LLC. You'd contribute your properties, Richard would contribute his business and connections, and we'd split ownership 60-40. 60-40. In whose favor? Well, Victoria said delicately, Richard would be managing everything day to day, so it only makes sense that he'd have the controlling interest. I almost laughed. You want me to hand over $300 million in property to your husband, who would then control it and presumably pay me some kind of distribution? It's not handing over, it's partnering. And think about Claire. Right now, she's going to inherit a mess of LLCs and property management headaches. This way, she'd inherit a clean, professionally run company. And if I say no? Victoria's smile thinned. Well, then we'd have to proceed with our concerns about your business practices. Richard's lawyer has already found some interesting things. Did you know that 3 of your properties have had building code complaints in the last 5 years? All resolved immediately and in compliance. Still, patterns like that can look suspicious to regulators. And then there's the question of whether you've properly reported all your rental income over the years. Tax audits can take years and cost millions, even when you've done nothing wrong. There it was. The threat wrapped in family concern. I need time to think about this, I said. Of course. But Margaret, she leaned forward, dropping her voice, I want what's best for Claire. And what's best for her is joining a family that understands her, that can provide for her, that won't embarrass her. If you care about your daughter, you'll do the right thing. I left that Starbucks feeling something I hadn't felt in 40 years. I felt cornered. That evening I did something I hadn't done in months. I drove to the cemetery where Thomas was buried. I sat on the bench next to his headstone and told him everything. What would you do? I asked the empty air. You always knew how to handle people better than I did. The answer came to me as I sat there. Thomas had always said that the best negotiations were the ones where everyone walked away feeling like they'd won something. He'd also said that sometimes the price of peace was worth paying, even when you could win the fight. I spent the next week making calls, first to Martin, then to my accountant, then to 3 different property management companies. I reviewed contracts, checked valuations, and confirmed cash reserves. Then I made one more call, to a private investigator I'd used occasionally for tenant screenings. The meeting was set for the following Monday. Victoria had insisted on Richard's office, another power move. The Hartford Commercial Group occupied a suite on the 10th floor of a building I owned, though I suspected she'd forgotten that detail. Present were Victoria and Richard, their lawyer Marcus Chen, Martin representing me, and an accountant I'd brought along. Claire and Ryan had been specifically excluded at my request. This was business, and I didn't want them in the middle of it. Thank you all for coming, Richard began. He seemed uncomfortable, and I suspected this whole thing had been Victoria's idea. My wife and I have been thinking about the future and how our families can work together. Marcus Chen pulled out a thick folder. We've prepared a preliminary partnership agreement. Mrs. Brennan would contribute her current property portfolio, valued at approximately $320 million. Richard would contribute Hartford Commercial Group, his industry connections, and his management expertise. The new entity would be owned 60% by the Hartford family and 40% by Mrs. Brennan. Martin raised his eyebrows. That's quite a proposal. It reflects the reality of management responsibility, Victoria said smoothly. Richard would be running everything. I pulled out my own folder. Before we discuss that, I'd like to share some information I've gathered. I opened it to show them documents my investigator had compiled. Victoria's face went white. What is that? This is a record of your financial situation over the last 5 years. Your home is mortgaged for 87% of its current value. You have $340,000 in credit card debt. Hartford Commercial Group has been losing money for 3 years running, staying afloat primarily on the lease income from, I paused, properties owned by Brennan Holdings. You had us investigated? Richard looked genuinely shocked. You were planning to do the same to me, I said evenly. Turnabout is fair play. I pulled out another set of documents. This is a record of complaints filed by Hartford Commercial Group's former clients. 6 allegations of mismanagement in the last 2 years. 4 lawsuits, 3 settled out of court. I looked at Richard. Your connections aren't what they used to be. This is outrageous, Victoria hissed. Marcus, is this legal? It's all public record, Martin said mildly. Anyone could access this information. I pulled out one more document. This is a letter I received yesterday from Patterson Property Management. They've completed their review of all commercial leases. Several tenants have expressed concern about Hartford Commercial Group's financial stability. They're recommending I consider other options when the leases come up for renewal next year. You can't do that, Victoria said. We have a contract, which expires in 14 months. I met her eyes. And given your financial situation and your recent threats against me, I'd be foolish to renew it. The silence in the room was thick with tension. Richard was reading through the documents with growing horror. Marcus was taking notes, probably calculating how much this was going to cost his clients. So what do you want? Victoria finally asked. Her voice had lost all its smoothness. I want peace. I want my daughter to be able to marry the man she loves without her families at war. I want to go back to my quiet life without threats of investigations or regulatory complaints. Name your terms, Marcus said. I pulled out one final document. This is a settlement agreement. I'll pay you $2 million. In exchange, you drop all complaints and investigations. You sign a non-disclosure agreement about my financial affairs. You make a public statement that any misunderstandings have been resolved. And most importantly, you never ever speak poorly of me to Claire or Ryan again. $2 million? Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. That's obscene, Marcus said. You're essentially paying them off. I'm paying for my daughter's happiness and my own peace of mind. $2 million is less than 1% of my net worth. It's worth it to me to make this problem go away. Richard was staring at the paper like it might bite him. Margaret, you don't have to do this. But I do. Because Victoria is right about one thing. We're going to be family, whether we like it or not, and I won't have years of hostility poisoning my daughter's marriage. I pulled out my checkbook. I'll write you a check right now. $2 million. You clear all pending complaints within 48 hours. You make a statement to your friends that everything was a misunderstanding and you're thrilled about the upcoming wedding. And you never contact me again except at family events, where you will be civil. Victoria was calculating. I could see it in her eyes. $2 million would clear their debts, shore up Richard's business, maybe even let them keep the house. And if we refuse? She asked. Then I pull Hartford Commercial Group's lease. I let everyone know why. Richard's reputation in this city will be destroyed. You'll probably have to sell the house. And I'll spend whatever it takes to defend myself against your complaints, which we both know are baseless. Martin added quietly. Mrs. Brennan has already set aside $5 million for legal fees if necessary. She's prepared for a long fight. Richard put his hand on Victoria's arm. Vicky, we should take this. She shook him off, but I could see her weakening. How do we know you won't use this against us later? That you won't hold it over our heads? I pulled out another document. This is a mutual non-disparagement agreement. I promise never to discuss your financial situation with anyone except my lawyer and accountant. You promise the same about mine. We start fresh at the wedding and move forward as extended family who keep appropriate boundaries. The room fell silent except for the tick of the clock on the wall. I could see Victoria warring with herself. Her pride wanted to fight, but her desperation needed the money. Finally, she looked at Marcus. What do you think? I think, he said carefully, that this is a generous offer given the circumstances. The alternative is expensive litigation with an uncertain outcome. Victoria closed her eyes. Fine, we'll take it. I wrote the check, dated it for 2 days in the future. You'll get this when Martin confirms that all complaints have been withdrawn and the statement has been made. As I stood to leave, Richard stopped me. Margaret, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. Victoria was hurt and she lashed out. We both know that's not an excuse, but I want you to know I never agreed with how she treated you. I nodded. Take care of that business, Richard. You have good people working for you. Let them help you turn things around. 3 months later, I stood in the back of St. Mary's Cathedral, watching my daughter walk down the aisle. She looked beautiful in a dress she'd chosen herself, paid for with her own savings plus a modest contribution from me that she'd actually accepted. Victoria and Richard were in the third row, dressed impeccably, smiling at all the right moments. To anyone watching, we looked like a perfectly normal extended family. No one would guess that underneath the surface was a $2 million settlement and enough bad blood to fill the Willamette River. Claire had forgiven me, mostly. We'd had several long conversations about why I'd kept my wealth secret, about her fears and my intentions. She understood, intellectually at least, even if she still sometimes looked at me with a mixture of confusion and hurt. Ryan had been surprisingly understanding. He'd actually thanked me for handling things with his mother the way I did. I think he'd known for years that his parents were living beyond their means, and he was relieved that the problem had been addressed without destroying his relationship with them. As for me, I'd made my peace with no longer being invisible. Word had gotten out, as it always does, about who I really was. I'd had to change my phone number twice to stop calls from financial planners and charity organizations, but mostly, life went on as before. I still shopped at Talbot's. I still drove my Honda. I still lived in my townhouse. The difference was that now, when I met new people, they knew. They looked at me differently, treated me differently. Some were more respectful, others more suspicious. Either way, they weren't seeing me anymore. They were seeing my bank account. At the reception, Victoria found me near the dessert table. "We need to talk," she said quietly. I braced myself for another confrontation. "I wanted to say thank you," she said instead. "Richard and I were drowning, and you threw us a life preserver, even if you also hit us with it first." I almost smiled. "How are things going?" "Better. We've cut way back on expenses. Richard is actually managing the business now instead of just schmoozing clients. We're profitable for the first time in 4 years." She paused. "I was horrible to you. I know that. I was scared and insecure, and I took it out on you. You called me an embarrassment," I said. To my face. "At my daughter's engagement party." "I did, and I was wrong." She looked me in the eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm working on being better. For Ryan, for Claire. Hell, even for myself. That's all any of us can do," I said. The band started playing, and I watched as Claire and Ryan took the floor for their first dance. They looked happy. That was all that mattered. A year has passed since the wedding. I'm learning to live with being known. I've started a small foundation, nothing flashy, that provides down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers in Portland. I call it the Second Chance Fund, named after the chance I got at 25 when someone believed I could handle a mortgage. Claire and Ryan bought a house in Beaverton. They did it themselves, though I quietly made sure they got a good deal on their mortgage rate through connections I'd never mentioned I had. They're talking about starting a family, and I find myself looking forward to being a grandmother more than anything I've looked forward to in years. Victoria and I have reached a careful détente. We're never going to be close, but we're civil. We can sit at the same table during family dinners without tension crackling in the air. I think we both understand that we wounded each other, and we're both trying to do better. Sometimes I wonder what Thomas would think of how it all turned out. Would he approve of me paying $2 million to solve a problem I could have fought and won? Would he understand why I finally let go of the invisibility we'd cultivated together? I think he would. Thomas always said that the measure of wealth wasn't what you had, but what you were willing to pay for the things that truly mattered. And peace, family, my daughter's happiness, those things mattered more than any amount of money. I still get calls from people who want something from me. Investment opportunities, charity requests, family members I haven't heard from in decades suddenly interested in reconnecting. I've learned to say no without guilt. I've learned that protecting my resources isn't the same as being selfish. Last month, Claire asked me to meet her for coffee. She had something to tell me, she said. I was prepared for anything: pregnancy announcement, job change, trouble with Ryan. Instead, she said, I want to learn about real estate. Not because I want your money or your properties, because I want to understand what you built, who you are. I've been thinking about your story a lot, Mom, and I realize I never really asked about your life. I only thought about how it affected mine. We spent 3 hours in that coffee shop while I told her about my first duplex, about the terror of signing that mortgage, about the satisfaction of watching my first tenants move in. I told her about the properties I'd lost, the mistakes I'd made, the lessons I'd learned. I told her about her father's unwavering support, about our decision to live simply, about the joy of building something that would last. She listened to all of it, asking questions, taking notes on her phone. When we finally stood to leave, she hugged me tight. I'm proud of you, Mom, she whispered. Not because you're rich, because you're strong. That moment, right there, was worth more than every property in my portfolio. I'm 64 years old, and I've learned that invisibility is both a gift and a curse. For 40 years I hid in plain sight, and it served me well. It let me build something real without the noise and interference of other people's expectations and assumptions, but it also cost me something: the chance to be fully known by the people I loved most. Would I do it differently if I could go back? I don't know. Maybe I'd tell Claire sooner. Maybe I'd be more open about my success. Or maybe I'd do exactly the same thing, because my daughter grew up strong and independent, unweighted by expectations of family wealth. What I do know is this: when Victoria Hartford called me an embarrassment at that engagement party, she was wrong. I'm not an embarrassment. I'm a woman who took one small duplex and turned it into an empire, who stayed true to herself even when it would have been easier to show off, who protected her daughter's independence even when it meant being misunderstood. And when the moment came to choose between being right and having peace, I chose peace. I paid $2 million to protect my family, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. That's not embarrassment. That's power used wisely. These days, I still drive my Honda Accord. I still shop at Talbot's. I still live in my townhouse, though I've finally updated the kitchen. Some things change and some things stay the same. But now when someone assumes I'm just an ordinary retired woman, I smile and let them think it. Because I've learned that the most powerful thing you can do is choose when to reveal yourself and when to remain hidden. And that's a lesson worth more than any property in Portland.